Good morning. I'm Tiisetso Makhele and welcome to Central News on this Friday, the 15th of August 2025. Now, South Africa's unemployment rate has climbed to 33.2% in the second quarter of this year. This leaves about 8.4 million people without jobs. This expanded rate, which includes those who have stopped looking for work, stands at 42.9%. Job creation is just not keeping up with our growing labor force, and provinces like the Free State face even higher rates of joblessness. Our guest today is Mr. Tiisetso Makhele, a public sector economist and social activist who has been outspoken about the urgent need for South Africa to industrialize. He believes that our over-reliance on service industries leaves the economy vulnerable and that large-scale industrial growth is key to creating sustainable jobs. In this special edition of the Current Review, episode 80, we will explore the reasons behind South Africa's high unemployment rate, the challenges facing provinces like the Free State, and how industrialization could transform our job market. Good morning, Mr. Makhele, and welcome to Central News. Thank you for joining us to discuss this important issue.
Thank you very much, Ms. Molejani, and greetings to the various viewers and followers of Central News in different platforms. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, as I have mentioned that the unemployment rate has risen to 33.2% with 8.4 million South Africans out of work. And in the last quarter, 159,000 people entered the labor force, but only 19,000 jobs were created. What do you think is the main reason job creation has stalled or slowed down?
No, thank you very much for that question. You will remember that the main driver of employment is economic growth. When the economy grows, it is able to attract necessary number of people who are then able to work. In fact, the Center for Development and Enterprise, which is a non-government organization that deals with economic research and analysis, projects that if the economy were to grow by about 4%, that would lead to an additional 400,000 jobs created in the economy. So the decline in the economy that is caused by, amongst others, the global economic crisis that started in the USA and other major economies in 2007, the COVID-19 emergence, the Russia-Ukraine wars, and so on, have led to what we have seen as a consistent plus or minus 1% growth in the economy, and that in itself has led to lesser jobs. But additionally, there are structural issues that leads to the economy of the country not creating jobs. For an example, our over-reliance on extraction of raw materials like gold, as well as agricultural products. That in itself leads to a situation where you actually import job opportunities, because when you extract a mineral like gold and you then export it to Belgium, for an example, where they are going to beneficiate it into jewelry, jobs are created there. And when it comes as a processed good, you have lost an opportunity of creating jobs. So that in itself leads to lesser job opportunities. But you also find yourself in a situation where you have got declining sectors like mining. That in itself affects jobs that are created. But secondly, with regard to the still under structural issues of the economy, you also have technological developments that leads to low job creation. For an example, the rise of e-commerce, because if you then are able to call a particular company for a product, it means there are a number of people in the middle who have lost those job opportunities. That in itself leads to shading of jobs, issues of robotics, but also issues of mismatch of skills. You'll find that people in a particular area have got particular skills, but the economy does not require those skills. That talks to the context of the educational institutions vis-a-vis the market needs. But also, we find that particularly with regard to the statistics that have been released, manufacturing as a sector as well as agriculture have declined. Agriculture maybe is because of seasonal changes or seasonal demands. But that in itself indicates that there is a lesser demand for locally produced goods and therefore demand for local labor. So those, I think, are some of the reasons that would have led to the stalling of employment creation. I think you are muted, Mulejane.
On Tate Makhele, you have mentioned a decline in manufacturing, you have mentioned a decline in mining, and in the last quarter, 6 out of 10 industries have lost jobs. And while gains may come mostly from trade, domestic work, and construction, what does this say about the structure of our economy? And are we actually creating the right kind of jobs?
That is a very, very important question. We are not creating the right kind of jobs. We are not focusing on the right kind of industries. Because that in itself indicates that we are over reliant on the tertiary sector, for example, government and so on. And in the long run, you are going to find yourself in a problem where you are going to not be able to fund those particular jobs, because those people that are employed in government, there is somebody who must fund their employment through taxes. So if the people are not employed in other sectors and they're employed in government, in the long run, the state will not be able to fund them because you are not producing. So it says that the structure of the economy needs to be changed. Traditionally, or in terms of economic theory, the economy must transition in a particular manner. It must move from the agricultural or agrarian state, where it just relies on producing agricultural and raw material, then it transitions to an industrialized economy. So in the context of our economy, when you look at the extent to which manufacturing is low in terms of its contribution to the economy, we have jumped that particular important sector and we have gone to the tertiary or the third layer of the economy, which is the one that deals with trade and services and so on. And that in itself is a problem. It means we need to go back to the drawing board, change our macroeconomic policy and change how we do things to ensure that now we focus more on the productive sectors like manufacturing, where real production takes. So rather than focusing on just as being a consumer nation, we can't be a consumer nation. For an example, even the phone that I'm using is probably from South Korea, China, or even the USA. So that in itself means that we're a consumer nation. So that needs a change in terms of the economy. The people that are supposed to be creating these jobs or producing these phones that we are using, are they in the streets? Are they queuing for jobs? When in fact, we are actually funding other countries in terms of those job opportunities. So that needs to change. So it says that the structure of our economy needs to change. So we really need a dedicated transformational agenda in terms of the state of the economy.
Now, I want us to look at the Free State for a bit. The unemployment rate in the Free State has climbed to 38.5%, which is, above the national unemployment rate. And despite adding about 12,000 jobs in the second quarter, why is industrialization so important for the Free State? And which industries or projects could realistically succeed in the Free State province?
Thank you very much. Very crucial question, which actually warms my heart. I'm very passionate about the province. I'm born here, and I think I will die here. The over-reliance, as I said, on the public sector and tertiary industries is an indication of us tiptoeing on a very dangerous situation. That in itself indicates that we need to do something very drastic. And as you have said, our unemployment rate is higher than that of the country. For example, if there were to be a blockade tomorrow, that says that no truck will enter the province from all the national roads. If there were to be such a blockade and no truck enters this particular province, there's going to be a crisis in that people would not have access to medicines, people would not have access to toiletries, people would not even have access to food, because actually we import almost everything that is on the shelves of a supermarket. So it shows that there's an urgent need for us to industrialize the economy, to show that it is self-sufficient. And whilst we are not a federal state, whilst we're not an island, and whilst the province is not an island, but you need to have sufficient capacity to supply for ourselves, and capacity to also export, so that we have additional money, so that the economy grows.
Thank you for that. And, you have called and you are very vocal about urgent industrialization. And, in practice, what does aggressive industrialization look like? And what lessons can we as a country take maybe from other countries such as Asian countries or China?
Yeah, thank you very much. Industrialization, in simple terms, like I said, involves changing the structure of the economy from the one that relies on the agricultural sector to the one that relies on manufacturing. It is very, very important in that manufacturing as a sector has got has got interrelationships with different sectors of the economy. When you manufacture a bottle, that bottle in itself it would require somebody to transport it from one place to the other, meaning you are speaking about the transport sector. That bottle in itself says, for an example, you will need energy to produce that particular bottle, which talks to the electricity sector. That bottle, in order for you to sell it, it means you will need marketing. So because of those interrelationships between manufacturing and these other sectors of the economy, it becomes important. Now, let's come to industrialization. Now, you have mentioned the Asian tigers. I've mentioned them in the article. The Asian tigers like Taiwan, South Korea, and Singapore. When they wanted to industrialize, what they did is that they looked at their capacities and they said, no. For an example, Taiwan at that time was simply relying on agriculture. And they said, can we look at high-tech, innovative products? And they said, can we look at the export market? And they looked at that particular capacity and they invested in those particular areas. So my proposal is that in the Free State, for an example, we are an agricultural province. We're very strong on agriculture. In fact, the Free State, if you look at the Thabo Mofokeng, for an example, we are better than even the Western Cape, the Cape winelands, in terms of rainfall and other climatic conditions, soil conditions. So on agriculture, we can even defeat the Western Cape. But the problem is that we must not only rely on primary agriculture, because it also says you are relying on the primary sector. We need to progress towards agro-processing, which is the processing of agricultural products to produce other products for the market. For an example, I know that in the Bethlehem area, there is a company called Remoho, and they are actually looking at going beyond production of apples, but also producing liquid juice or apple juice to sell locally and internationally. So agro-processing is an important sector that you can look at in the Thabo Mofokeng district. So we are actually proposing, in terms of this massive industrialization drive that we're talking about, that we look at the possibility of establishing what we refer to as an agro-processing hub in the Thabo Mofokeng district, in particular, Bethlehem and Harrismith area. What are the spin-offs? You'll find that will create spin-offs in that farming in that particular area, or primary agriculture in that particular area, will rise because there will be demand. These agro-processing plants will then need more apples, more cherries, and more products. But also, you will need storage. So warehousing and storage is another industry that will respond to this particular agro-processing drive. So you'll need storage. You'll also need logistics, people who will transport these either through trucks or other areas. You'll need packaging, you'll need marketing, agri-tourism. So those are the spin-offs that will spin off from this. So when we speak about this massive industrialization, we are aware that we are not only referring to one industry that you build, but we are referring to the actual spin-offs that will emanate from this particular area. We're also proposing that in addition to this agro-processing hub that you would have established in the Thabo Mfutsanyana district, that you also create a logistics and storage hub in Malutapofu. For example, the Harrismith area is strategically positioned for you to travel to KwaZulu-Natal, but also for you to travel to Johannesburg, where there is an international airport. So that close proximity in itself is a strength that can be used for us to create that logistics and storage hub to store not only those agro-processed products, but other projects like automotives that you have identified. Again, we are proposing the Free State provincial government, of which I'm an employee, has developed what it calls a cluster development strategy in the previous financial year. Now, that cluster development strategy envisions a situation where you would assist private sector to develop certain industrial clusters in certain areas. So what are industrial clusters? Industrial clusters in simple economics is a group of like-minded companies that are operating in a particular geographic space that will then benefit from working together rather than from working against one another. It emanates from the concept of economies of scale and economies of scope, where you say that there's a need if company X is able to produce only 5 laptops. If they are able to unite as laptop producers or as electronics producers, they are then able to produce 100,000 laptops, 100,000 chips, and they're able to even export them. So we are in that particular process of saying that cluster development strategy will then assist the provincial government to be focused in terms of how it assists SMME. So MEC Totoma Kume, who's the MEC for Finance, Economic Development and Tourism, on the 20th of March this year, he launched a textiles cluster in Qwaqwa in Kutarichaba as part of actually turning the sword and indicating the importance of this particular sector in the province. So in short, the textiles cluster is intended to actually indicate our interest and our approach in terms of clustering a number of companies that are operating there by making sure that you save the jobs that are in there, but you also create new ones. So the sectors that have been identified by the Free State provincial government in terms of this particular cluster strategy are: number 1, agro-processing, as I said, automotive, tourism, clothing, textiles, leather and footwear, as well as manufacturing broadly. So the importance of these particular clusters is that, number 1, you are then able to achieve economies of scale and economies of scope by making sure that these producers are able to share, for an example, energy, electricity, they are able to share space. So lower cost of production in that area are then able to make sure that they become competitive. This model has been used, for an example, in Taiwan, where they have assisted what they called chaebols. Chaebols are those conglomerate industries that they assisted. So it's in line with that particular approach to make sure that we achieve what we wanted to achieve.
Thank you so much for that. So I just want us to look at the informal sector. A contentious issues in the jobs debate is the informal sector. And we know that many South Africans survive by hustling in the informal sector. We are talking about street vending, small spaza shops, freelancing, and even if they are not formally employed. StatsSA estimates that about 3.3 million people are in informal employment, yet we saw that informal sector jobs declined by 19,000 in the last quarter. And in the Free State, the informal workforce shrank by about 14,000. There's also been a debate, after A bank CEO suggested that if we now took in consideration all the informal earners, our real unemployment rate might be closer to 10% rather than the 33%. How do you view the role of the informal sector in this crisis? Is unemployment being overstated, or are these informal livelihoods masking a deeper problem that we are facing?
No, thank you very much. That is a very important question, and I referred to the informal sector in my article, but just to indicate that whilst we appreciate those academic debates that are taking place around the calculations of the unemployment or employment rates, it is important that we are not too focused on them at the expense of actually trying to find solutions for our people. Because at the end of the day, when people are unable to put food on the table, it does not matter which explanation or which definition is important or is sustained. What is important is that we have to make sure that people have sustainable lives. Now, in fact, there are many people who are employed, still going to work every day, but you'll find that that person is just going to work just for the sake of getting money for transport fare for the next month, or simply for him or her to eat, or to be even more indebted. So I would not want to dwell on that particular argument that our unemployment rate is understated. We have got a deeper challenge in this country, deeper. But for the purpose of this discussion, I would want us to focus and utilize Statistics South Africa's official definitions, which are based on international conventions. So the 10%, I would not dwell on it for this particular discussion. It's a discussion that will take place, but I will rely on official statistics of Statistics South Africa. The informal sector is very crucial. It's a lifeline to many families. In fact, we know, many of us, when we grew up, we know that there are those mothers who would go and sell fat cakes near a school. They would be able to sustain their families to a point where their offspring or their children will even go and become graduates at university. That is how important that sector is. Whilst we don't want or are not articulating that people should be permanently in the informal sector, we appreciate the importance of that particular sector. And we are saying, as I said in my article, that the informal sector must not be looked at as something that must be wished away. It is there to stay. Ours is to develop policy positions that then begins to say, to what extent do we appreciate that this sector exists, number one. Number two, this sector is a lifeline for many households. How do we save their jobs? Because losing 14,000 jobs in that particular sector in the Free State is an indictment, and it is something that will impoverish further people. So to what extent do we also make sure that we ensure that those who are operating in that informal sector are able to transition from that particular sector to the formal sector? Also, we have to find a way of making sure that we link the formal sector and the informal sector. Now, the proposal that I would want to make in this regard, a policy proposal that I would like to make in this regard, is that we look at the informal sector as an extension of the formal sector. For example, in terms of this industrialization drive that I'm proposing in my article and elsewhere where I'm speaking, in that industrialization must also feed into or assist the informal sector to grow. For an example, if, for example, you establish that agro-processing hub that I'm proposing there in Maluti Apofu, there would be somebody in the outskirts of that hub who has got, for an example, a delivery vehicle, but they are not utilizing it for delivery. But because there is a need to transport some of the agro-processed products from one factory to the other, that person can be utilized to make an additional income and to participate in the economy. So you link that informal economy with the industrialization drive, but also broadly with the formal sector. So my proposal is that we need to look into that particular sector not as a nuisance, but as a sector that is important for us to grow the economy holistically.
Now, the latest figures show a slight decrease in work seekers that are discouraged. About 28,000 fewer people nationally have given up looking for work in the second quarter, and the Free State has seen a big drop of 40,000 in discouraged job seekers. And this has helped nurse the unemployment rate down a bit. What do you make of this? Is it a glimmer of hope that fewer people are losing hope, or could there be other reasons behind this decline in discouraged workers?
Yeah, no, statistics is a very important area of science in that it is very difficult for you to make or to conclude just on the basis of a statistical outcome. It is important for you to go and further interrogate that particular data. For an example, it may differ from one person to the other in terms of why were you discouraged yesterday and today you wake up and you say, no, I'm going to seek employment. It may differ from one person to a person, but there are certain trends that you can actually deduce when analyzing the data deeper. And I think that exercise can be done. The department that I work in has got a very strong research unit. I know Free State Provincial Treasury also has got a deeper research unit. They can look deeper in terms of this. But in terms of if you look at economic assumptions now, you'll appreciate that in certain instances, people who then decide to say, no, I am no longer looking for a job in this particular area. I'm still discouraged. There's no chance of me getting a job in the Free State. I'm now going to KZN, Gauteng, Western Cape, or even the Northern Cape for that matter. The Free State, in terms of the statistics that are there, the Free State is one of the largest contributors in terms of migration patterns to other provinces. So out-migration affects the Free State more than many other provinces. So people are more likely to leave this particular province for potential job opportunities elsewhere. Now, we know that in terms of statistics. So it is possible and highly possible that some of the people who are the reasons why the discouraged workers or the data around discouraged work seekers has declined may have been because of that inter-provincial migration of people who have left the province. But again, it could be that somebody was not having in the previous quarter was not having skills or was not having qualifications in a particular area. Maybe they participated in EPWP or they went through to a particular course. They did a short course on artisanship or engineering. Now they feel now they can go and study. They can go and look for employment. So it is possible that this enhancement in skills could have led to some people deciding to go and seek work. But also, if you look at the statistics that have been released, if you look at quarter to quarter, the number of jobs that we have created in the province is about 12,000 between the previous quarter and this quarter. But if you look at year-on-year data, if you compare the second quarter of 2024 and the second quarter of 2025, 21,000 additional jobs have been created in the province. That in itself can likely ignite enthusiasm or re-inspire somebody to say, no, jobs are being created. If you see somebody who was not working, but they are working this week, you can decide and say, I'm no longer discouraged, I'm going to work. So those are some of the issues that would lead to those changes in the workforce with regard to discouraged work seekers.
Looking at the private sector and its role in all of this, we often hear that business confidence in South Africa is low. You see companies are hesitant to invest or are even shedding jobs. And at the same time, there are calls for the private sector to come to the party by investing in local industries, by supporting small suppliers, by avoiding unnecessary retrenchments and training young people. In your opinion, Mr. Makhele, are South African businesses doing enough to create jobs and industrialize the economy? And how can policy encourage the private sector specifically to invest in job-rich projects rather than, say, importing goods or automating?
That is a very, very important question. I was having a discussion with someone yesterday, and that person said, no, you guys are like doing these particular studies, an economist, a theorist, and I was saying to that particular person, public sector or the state has got a responsibility in terms of creating necessary policies to ensure that there is progress economically, socially, and otherwise. For example, public sector can say, we want to provide social welfare grants to 1 million people. That is a government intervention. Now, if you do that without the involvement of the private sector, you are risking a situation where you may be going in a particular direction and the private sector possibly in an opposite direction. It is very, very important that the government, when it articulates and develops policy, it does that in close collaboration with the private sector. I don't think that it is true. I don't think it is true that the private sector is not investing enough. I don't think it is true that the private sector or large corporations are holding their money. Of course, there are those large corporations that would prefer to invest elsewhere in the world, in the USA, in China, and elsewhere, rather than in the province or in the country. But I think that generally, private sector is investing. But the difference is that they are not investing where government wants them to invest. Because there is a misalignment of the visions between the private sector and the state. And that is where you need social compacting methods. Now, social compacting methods is where you will, not only in theory or not only in workshops or conventions, but where you would practically ensure that there is collaboration on a day-to-day basis between the state and the capital. Now, if, for an example, the Mangaung municipality or the provincial government says, we want to develop around the N8 corridor. The N8 corridor is between Bloemfontein, Botshabelo, Tabanchu. We want development to go that way. And the private sector says, no, we are going north. North is your woodlands and the like. Now, this shows that there is a misalignment of plans. And that is where you need to arrest. And I know that in most cases, private sector and public sector, there is trust issues that needs to be resolved. So I am calling for a serious social compacting and to ensure that our public participation is not necessarily to tick the boxes. When you say there's a public participation in a particular hall at 10 o'clock, it is not to tick the boxes. It is to ensure that we have the views and inputs of industry. Any policy that we develop, any strategy that we develop, we must have the input of not only private sector, you also need the unions, which is called labor, and civil society. Now, industrialization requires the private sector. There is no government which is going to industrialize. There is no department that has got an ability to industrialize anywhere in the world. It did not happen even in the Asian tigers. It was the private sector that actually industrialized. That is why I made mention of Taiwan when it used those chaebols. There it was family conglomerates. They funded those family conglomerates, they supported them, and they made sure that they move with the national agenda of economic development. So even here in the province, there is no government which is going to achieve industrialization. It is the private sector. Now, if the private sector is going north and the public sector is going south, we're not going to achieve that industrialization. So it is important that at all material times, we engage with one another, we sit around the table, and we look at the national objectives and what we want to achieve so that at least we move in the right directions. Now, the other issue is that I would advise the state or the public sector to avoid at all material times. The first one I've indicated is planning in silos or planning in the boardrooms outside of the real actors or the real industry participants, but also deal with issues of red tape because people would rather go and invest elsewhere where they know that if I apply for a company today, tomorrow I can be able to operate, rather than go to a place where you are going to be taken from pillar to post just to register one company, a sole proprietary company. You are going to be taken from pillar to post just to sell eggs. So red tape is a problem, and the state has got the capacity to address that. Secondly, the issue of cost of doing business. I've already dealt with ease of doing business, cost of doing business. If it is expensive for you to operate in a particular area, as an investor, you are going to run away. Now, the state cannot operate as if the municipality is sitting there, provincial government is sitting there, national government is sitting there. There has to be a dedicated approach and a plan. If we're saying, for example, we want development in a particular area, the municipality must then be able to say, in this particular area, we'll make sure that there is incessant supply of electricity, there is water, the roads are in good condition, and so the rates and taxes are not expensive, so that we are able to attract that particular investment. And then if the provincial government, the national government says, we're going to give this particular incentive to this particular entity, then we know that there is collaboration and people will come and invest in the province. So I'm saying private sector is very important, but the state must drive at a particular theoretical level.
Now, Mr. Makhele, and in your writings, you have used the term bubble industries, particularly to describe sectors that don't produce tangible goods and could be unsustainable. You've warned that our economy is relying on these bubble industries, which may explode anytime. Can you please explain that concept to our viewers, and what are the risks if these bubbles burst, and how would having a stronger industrial base shield us from such shocks?
Thank you very much. I'm very passionate about that subject. History is amassed with examples of instances where such bubbles exploded. The first example is what happened in 2007 in the United States, where large corporations or financial institutions, because the economy was blooming at that time, they gave loans to almost everybody. Even the defaulters were given loans to buy property, and then they will then be able to sell that particular property because the economy was grooming. Unfortunately, the prices of properties fell. And when the prices of properties fell, there were serious defaults, and that is how the bubble exploded there in the USA. I'll make an example in terms of responding to a question coming to here in South Africa. In 2010, you go to the market, you want to buy a property, and it's a 3-bedroom house, they sell it for 100,000. It has got, I'll make an example, it has got 16,000 bricks. The cement that was used there is 30 kgs or 30 bags of cement. The plaster that was used there is a certain amount. The roofing that was used there is the same. The same property that was where you use the same material in 2010, when you now sell it in 2020, you say it is 1 million. Where does the 900,000 come from? Because there's not been any additional production in the economy that has happened. The property is still the same. It is still in that particular area. But what we utilize is what was utilized in the USA. It's a expectational economics. You are expecting that at a particular time, the value of this property would have risen. But that expectational approach to economics is dangerous in that 10 years, no additional jobs were created, no additional cement was bought, no additional bricks were bought. So it means in the real economy, nothing has changed. But in this bubble economy, or in this theoretical economy, things have changed, and there's a 900K extra, which is nowhere to be found. It has not been made. Nobody has made that 900,000 in that particular period. It is just expectational economics. Now, over a certain period of time, you rely on that bubble and you say it is real money. It is not real money in the real economy because jobs have not been created, additional stock have not been created. Now, what happens is that in the long run, because you are creating this particular bubble, in the long run, these people, all of them would not be able to find employment, and you would have these properties that are so expensive, and they are going to decline as it happens in 2007. These 3.5 million houses that you see, automatically they will decline because of the economy, and that bubble will explode. It's a dangerous environment. That is why we always advise that let us focus on the productive sector. When we say a house should be sold, there must have been construction work that has been done there to create additional impetus in the economy. There must have been an additional creation of a brick in the economy. You see a brick from one place to the other. So this bubble economy is a fallacy. So that is why I'm of the view that the sectors that we need to focus on in the economy are manufacturing, construction, electricity, and other sectors, rather than focusing on the finance sectors, because that is the money in the mind. It is not real money. Another issue here is that, for an example, if you rely on foreign aid, for an example, as an economy, and you are not relying on your own money that you have created through bricks that were created through creating your own medicines, toiletries, even toilet paper. If you rely, for example, on this foreign aid, and you rely on this bubbling economy that is growing but is not really growing, what happens is that if that foreign aid is cut, or if the prices of those houses collapse, the economy is going to explode. That is what we're referring to in short. So it's a fictitious economy, according to me.
Okay, Ntate Makhele, and finally, with the unemployment rate so high and seemingly intractable, what keeps you as an economist so hopeful that South African can turn the situation around? And if we could have this conversation or reconvene a year from now, what progress would you like to see as evidence that we are on the right track? And what is your message to policymakers and ordinary South Africans and our viewers regarding the urgency of industrializing and job creation?
No, thank you very much for that question. And it is at the end of the tail. So it gives me an opportunity now to at least summarize the issues that I've raised. Is there hope? Do I have hope? Yes. The South African people are a very resilient people. The South African people were resilient even during the days of violent colonialism. They were colonized by the enemy from the 1400s to the 1600s. The South African people became resilient even during the days of apartheid. Apartheid is not easy. Many countries would not have survived apartheid. We remained hopeful even during that period. You'll remember that even in that period of apartheid, in our own townships, we used to have serious entrepreneurs, people who would then establish their own shops during the height of apartheid, establish their own shops, and others were even able to fund and support liberation movements or liberation fighters who maybe wanted to skip the country or maybe wanted to go into hiding. I can make an example of the late Richard Maponya in Soweto. In my township of Botshabelo, I can make mention of Ndate Matsaba in D section and E section. So every township had those particular people. So I have got hope that we will survive. But that survival needs us to work together and focus. As a people, we cannot consistently focus on investors and external people as a priority. Our primary preoccupation must be the ordinary people of South Africa. Our focus in terms of whether it is policy, fiscal policy, monetary policy, or any kind of policy must be on the basis of prioritizing the people of South Africa. The investors will come afterwards. If you want to make a policy position, if you want to develop an intervention, it must prioritize locals first. And that is what is done all over the world. So we are probably the only country that's not doing that, and it's a problem. Now, what do I propose for policymakers and other stakeholders in this regard? Number one, I will not re-emphasize the issue of industrialization as an important intervention to change the structure of the economy. Currently in South Africa, we have what we call the Industrial Action Policy, the Industrial Policy Action Plan, IPAP. I am proposing that that IPAP must be transformed and it must become a policy, not an action plan. It must be an industrial policy or industrialization policy of the country, which must be funded through the national fiscus. Currently, we have got an IPAP. It is not funded. It's an action plan, but there is no budget that begins to say this 400 billion is for IPAP. There's no such a fund. The industrialization policy must be funded by the state through the national fiscus. And we must ensure that that industrialization policy is customized to every municipality, every district, and every province, because they are not the same. Mangaung municipality cannot be like Ngwathe municipality, for an example. They are different. So if you industrialize in this area, you can't do it the way you're doing it in that particular area. So even in how you find and support that, it must be different. I am actually requesting and suggesting that as the state, we must propose or drive for manufacturing as a sector to contribute at least 40% in the GDP in 10 years. I envision that, and I think that is possible. Looking at the capacity that we have as a country, looking at our human capital as a country, I think it is possible. What do I also propose? I also propose that we amend our curriculum. I don't think that our curriculum is responsive to the needs of the market. I think that from ECD, early childhood development upwards, up until university, our curricula is not responding to what the labor market is requiring. It is too theoretical and it's not practical. You need to emphasize skills, practical skills, to ensure, for example, that in every township there are schools for skills. In the apartheid days, they used to call them ambars. So a school for skill, for example, students will be taught carpentry in a particular skill, so that they are not going to wait to go and apply for jobs. They are able to do carpentry and they're able to enter the job market easily. So amending the curriculum from ECD up until university level to ensure that there is technical and vocational training for all, but to also ensure that we are able to deal with industrialization issues. I'm also proposing what I am referring to as a public works program. A public works program that focuses on specific sectors like energy, water, rail, and other infrastructure. Now, and through this public works program, I'm not necessarily emphasizing the current low-cost jobs that we've seen through other programs. I'm referring to a program that will encourage artisanship, that will encourage apprenticeship amongst young people, women, people with disabilities, people in the rural areas, and which is highly funded throughout the country. And that to be driven by the state. We understand the importance of public sector in terms of the tender process. There are certain expertise that the state does not have, and it would from time to time outsource from the private sector. But there are certain areas where the state can simply say, we are embarking on the refurbishment of this dam or a water reservoir. It's a public works program on that water program, and young people will be there employed as artisans and to gain knowledge as well. I am also proposing that in terms of the Black Industrialist scheme, because the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition has got a Black Industrialist scheme where they offer certain funding to people that they refer to as Black industrialists, people who are in the manufacturing industry who are Black, but who are producing a certain volume, who are at a certain level of turnover. I am proposing that the requirements for that be amended so that it allows new entrants to also get support. Because in the way it is structured, it actually closes out many potential beneficiaries. So I'm saying the regulations and the requirements must be relaxed a bit for the Black industrialists so that we have proper Black industrialists. I am also proposing an anti-monopoly policy for the state. At the current moment, we are relying on what is called the Competition Commission. Now, Economics 101 in terms of microeconomics teaches us that when there is a small number of large companies that are dominating in a particular sector, for example, I won't make an example because let's say company X is producing eggs, and they are the only ones who are producing eggs in that particular area. They have got full monopoly in terms of determining price. So they can charge you as much as you want. You won't go anywhere. So monopolies are not good for the consumers, but they're also not good for the economy because there is no chance of growing that particular economy because they will produce as much as they want because they determine the market, they determine the price. So we need to destroy monopolies. One way of destroying monopolies is to develop an anti-monopolistic policy, but to also establish clusters like we experienced in the Taiwan. I mentioned the chaebols. Those clusters, because it's a conglomerate of companies that are operating in a particular sector, will then be able to get state incentives to ensure that they employ young people, they employ people from historically disadvantaged communities, but you will also give support to those particular companies to make sure that they are able to compete in the market. Because if they are unable to compete in the market, those large enterprises will destroy them. They will push them out of the market. So you establish those and you make sure that they are sustainable. So in that way, you will dilute the monopolies that are in the sector. I'm also proposing, lastly, that there is a specific fund that is established to support infrastructure enhancement to refurbish dilapidated factories. For example, there are factories here in Bosabelo that were developed during the days of apartheid by the government in the 1979. Most of them are dilapidated. And when a factory comes from KwaZulu-Natal and they say, we want to operate, it would seem as if they are starting a factory afresh. So there is a need for us to ensure that we attract investors, that we have a fund to enhance those particular industries. So in short, I've got hope. I'm hoping that we'll increase the manufacturing sector. And I am saying that it is possible and it can be done. Industrialization is the way. And we have to make sure that industrialization does not operate on its own. It also integrates the informal sector. It integrates smaller and emerging companies. In short, that is my story.
Thank you so much, Mr. Makhele, for joining us and having this conversation with us today.
Thank you very much, Yalebo Kejani, and thank you very much to the viewers for your patience with me.
Thank you so much. With us today, viewers, it was Mr. Makhele, a seasoned economist in the public sector and community activist, bringing us a perspective on the unemployment figures and why job creation has stalled, and also bringing proposals on why industrializing the economy could turn things around. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Tiisetso Makhele. This is the Current Review, episode 80 on Central News. Have a beautiful day.